Yeah, I think it's interesting that Sami is asking us to forget about the theology of it, which is, kind of convenient if you're trying to defend the idea that religion is relevant. If you're essentially putting it down to saying, well, here's a list of good things that religious people say. I'm not arguing with that. I'm not saying that religious people are bad people. I'm not saying that religious people can't come up with good ideas. But I'm saying that the source of our most reliable understanding of reality and the source of our understanding of how best we should live together come from secularism and not from theology. I'm going to address here now, I'm addressing here Sami's original points. The idea that there are still a lot of problems that science hasn't solved is of course correct. But it has solved a lot more than religion. If you're, seriously ill, or if somebody close to you is seriously ill, and if you have any sense, you're going to bring them to a doctor rather than pray over them. There are instances where people have done the opposite. You see it every so often. People pray over their sick children, and the children die. One of the main advances that has come through secularism is is women's rights and gay people's rights. These are things that have been at its most polite, have been delayed by religious misogyny and homophobia. And most of the advances in those areas have been, have been fought all the way and are still being fought at United Nations levels by an alliance of the.
Could you speak into the mic? We can't hear very well.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. What I was saying is that that women's rights and gay people's rights are issues that have been advanced by secularism and that have been opposed by religious blocs, both in terms of religious teachings and also political alliances at the United Nations between the Islamic States and the Vatican. In terms of Jesus and Muhammad, which Sami talks a lot about, I think the Jesus thing, in terms of preaching about the kingdom of God, if you look at the biblical story, and if you start pre-Jesus, the whole essence of the Old Testament, the core of the Old Testament story is that one God tells one tribe that if they obey His rules, that He'll help them to kill other people and take their land. That's not a distortion of it. That is the core story of the Torah in the Old Testament. When you come to Jesus, there's a lot of Jesuses in the New Testament. There's the various Jesuses in the different Gospels who have different priorities. The Jesus is written about by Paul, and Revelation, and Mark, which is the first chronologically of the Gospels, is an apocalyptic preacher who believes that the world is coming to an end within the lifetime of people that are listening to him. And that's what the give up your property is about. It's not being kind to people, because you don't need it because the world is coming to an end pretty soon. Later, as it became evident that that wasn't happening and people were dying off, and you come into Matthew and Luke and John, or whoever these people were, because the names were applied to them centuries later, the message becomes more metaphysical. But that's not how it started out. Jesus also told people that they had to hate their parents if they were to follow. The Jesus of Revelation is, like some manner of psychopath, just go around slaying people in a horrific way. And the fact that that is a you know, within a vision, puts it essentially on a par with the Jesus of Paul who came to him in a vision. There's no reason to take one of those visions as being more reliable than the other. In terms of Muhammad being able to implement the teachings of Jesus and the Medina Constitution and religious freedom, again, if we take that at face value, what Sami's essentially saying is that, in fact, I think he explicitly said at one stage that it was identical to a secular state in terms of religious freedom. So if that's the case, that's a good thing. Shows that secularism is good rather than that Islam is good. I think it's more nuanced than that. I think, you know, things like the aftermath of the Battle of the Trench, again, you know, is something that doesn't quite fit in with that. You know, the idea of in the same way as any religions, if you look at the formation of any religions, the teachings of religions when they are in a minority are far more tolerant and pluralist and peaceful than the teachings of the same religions when they're in power. With regard to the idea of you know, religion tackling poverty through a charity tax, and wouldn't that be a great idea in secular society? It does exist in secular society. The welfare state is based on the idea that wealthier people should help poorer people. You know, it doesn't always work perfectly, but it is there. You know, it's a secular value in terms of the development of human rights from the Convention of Human Rights, which is gradually being, you know, evolved into conventions on civil and political rights and social rights. Morality evolves. You know, initially morality, our morality as humans was similar to the morality of other animals, in that it was about protection of the tribe. But it has evolved. And we now have a sense of morality that is about helping other sentient beings. It's not, I'm kind of straying to a certain extent into Sami's second talk here, but the idea of if you take, say, racism, nationalism, other secular ideologies that people believe are bad, sure, nobody's suggesting that all secular people are good or that all religious people are bad. What I'm saying is that in an already difficult task of trying to figure out, first of all, and then implement collectively a society that's best for minimising suffering and maximising flourishing, that religion complicates the matter, and religion, in fact, corrupts the matter. And I think that it's not that it's for a different reason. I think religion does still operate on the same basis. But it adds in an extra dimension. It says, well, it's not just about suffering in this life, it's also about suffering and flourishing in the afterlife. And so you have to add into the equation the effect of your behaviour on your soul and other people's souls and other, you know, and the effect on souls in this afterlife, all of which are just imaginary concepts. But it's essentially the same principle, except extended into an afterlife. So you say, well, I won't do this because even though it might help me now, I prefer to get my rewards in the afterlife. And I think it's more prudent if we're talking about the effect of our behaviour on other sentient beings, that we focus on this life. You know, it's the life that we know is here. We know our behaviour has an impact here. You know, we all have different beliefs about what happens in the afterlife. But if you're trying to put together a morality that society can operate on, then the only way that you can do that is by, or not the only way, but the fairest way to do that, is to recognise that everybody has their various religious and theological beliefs about either the presence or absence of an afterlife, and that the only way to vindicate the right of everybody to hold those beliefs and to practice those beliefs in reality, where there are multiple beliefs, is for the state to remain neutral and for the state to focus on dealing with the problems of this life. And you know, there's enough problems to be addressing in this life for states without having to worry about afterlives as well. So I think, again, going back to so there's one other thing, you have just about time to get in this other point, that Sami was mentioning racism and nationalism, and I'll bring in the sort of, you know, the atrocities of Mao and Stalin and communism, etc., into this as well. Yeah, those are problems, but they're problems because they're similar to religion. They're not problems because they're different to religion. They're problems because they're based on unjustified faith and dogma. And those are the underlying problems, as faith and dogma. And you can apply those to religious processes and outcomes, and to non-religious processes and outcomes. The difference is that with non-religious faith and dogma, they eventually bump into reality and we notice that they're not working. Whereas religion hides the testability of its claims in an literally untestable afterlife. So I'll finish this point, but I'll remind you at the end of everything that I say here, that the notion here is not whether religion is relevant to society, it's that it's less relevant than it used to be. Thanks very much.